Is Russia reaching across the Atlantic to find manpower for its war effort? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran, and leaked footage coming to us from Cuba shows just how desperate Russian forces are. But why Cubans? Let's get into it. Okay, so this is it looks like a Cuban. You can hear him speaking Spanish, who says that he says, I knew the contract was true when I arrived here. The Russian Federation brought me here. And what they mean by true, so what has happened recently is that stories have broken that Cubans are being recruited to fight in Ukraine for Russia. And right, you can see here that a number of news outlets are covering it. And that it's not clear that Cuban authorities are even aware that this recruitment is happening, right? They talk about how her husband, this woman's husband, a 49-year-old, right, was able to buy a new sewing machine, a refrigerator, and a cell phone because her 49-year-old husband, a bricklayer, left their home to fight for the Russian army in Ukraine, and then he wired her a signing bonus of about $2,000, which in Cuban pesos, it describes as being worth more than 100 times the average monthly state salary of $17. So that is the equivalent in the U.S. of receiving, about $240,000. A huge windfall. I mean, would you go fight? I mean, if you were, an impoverished, high school educated person in a, rural America, and someone offered you $300,000 to go fight for, a third country in a war. Let's say if Sudan offered you $300,000 to go fight Eritrea, would you do it? If you thought a little bit about it, you see where people might be coming from, right? And they recruit, of course, classically in places like La Federal, a community of about 800 people where 1 in 4 residents are unemployed. And along the 100-meter dirt road where Ms. Cervantes lives, at least 3 men have left for Russia since June, and another has sold his home in anticipation of going. She says you can count on one hand those who are left. It's driven by necessity. Dozens of Cubans from rural districts in and around Havana have been recruited into this scheme. And it's not clear how much the Cuban military or Cuban government knew. But remember, guys, Cuba has mandatory military service, and it's actually a blessing and a curse, right? Cuba's compulsory service requires all male citizens to serve 3 years in the EJT, the Ejército Juvenil de Trabajo, a youth labor army, which is a paramilitary organization. Right? It allows the army to devote itself fully to military matters and served as a reserve force. So it means that these youths get a sort of subset of training in military affairs, right? They become very familiar with a military mindset. They probably receive some level of military training, right? The present conscription policy, enlistment is obligatory sometime between the ages of 16 and 28. Most nationals not called to service until they're 17. Right? It's not clear necessarily on why. And what's interesting is it really focuses on the military training aspect, which means, of course, that every one of these Cubans doesn't need a ton of combat training. They are going to be familiar with weapons. They're going to be familiar with using a radio. They're going to be familiar with moving in a formation, with receiving and giving orders. And so all of this military background means that Cuba, combining military service and poverty, is a winning combination for Russia,
Aquí en Rusia, cerca de Tula. Este es el campamento. Yo supe que era verdad el contrato cuando yo me llegué aquí, me llevaron a la Federación Rusa, si no...
Says everyone here knew what they were coming for. I know it for sure. That's been one of the rumors in a lot of these stories, is that Cubans are tricked or trafficked. They think they're going to be working on military bases or that they're going to be laborers, probably because the Cuban government doesn't actually want their citizens, their able-bodied citizens, to fight for another country's military. And so the result is that they probably sign contracts that on paper say things like working on military bases in occupied territories. But no, all of these Cubans seem fully aware that they are going to be they're going to be fighters.
Lo que todo el que vino para acá sabía lo que venía. Eso sí te lo digo clarito.
¿En qué sentido?
En que venían para la guerra, eso lo sabía todo el mundo.
All right, I want to point out these are some Cuban youths who also likely are getting recruited. Notice Hornets, Lakers, True Religion shirt, Nike, and of course rocking some sandals.
Yeah, un momento, pero...
Menos mal que yo tenía eso ahí. Claro, para que tú veas lo que son las cosas, ¿viste? Y estaba revisando aquí en las llamadas.
So, yeah, so to translate for you guys a little bit, he says, this is a contract with the Army of Russia where you adquiriana la ciudadana. I don't know what he means by adquieren. Adquieren la ciudadana. I don't know what that means, but it says something, sign the contract for one probably year.
Me dijo, mándame la foto del pasaporte. Se la mandé. Y me mandó un audio como al minuto. Me mandó un audio y me dijo, en estos días te avisamos para cuándo es tu pasaje. No me contestó, más nunca. Después le volví a escribir de nuevo. Me dijiste que me ibas a decir para cuándo era mi pasaje. No, que hay problema con los cubanos. Ok. No, que después, como a las 2 semanas o 3 semanas, me dijo, no, que estamos en reuniones. Y después fue que yo estoy viendo todo el dilema.
Okay, so she says, this is when I see all the problems of the two boys. What he's saying is that she got his passport and then she probably ran a background check. And you may notice this man has some face tattoos. He's got some neck tattoos. This guy probably has some, my suspicion is that he has some gang affiliations, maybe a criminal record. And Russia's like, listen, no, like we can screen our own convicts, but we are not bringing in Cubans, especially Cubans who deal drugs, who are going to contribute to a lack of discipline in our military. Because we know that Russia has struggled immensely with discipline in its military. And also, guys, I did want a quick shout out. If you guys haven't lived under a rock, you know that when I was in the military and I was deployed, I just pounded energy drinks like it was going out of style. That's how I kept my caffeine up, my focus on combat patrols. But energy drinks are gross. They're loaded with sugar. They left me feeling bloated, and they're really inconvenient, right? Imagine going on patrol with 2 big cans of Rip It in your pocket. It's terrible. That's why I worked with a manufacturer in Denver to launch Strike Gum. Strike Gum is the energy drink alternative. Each piece of gum contains 90 milligrams of caffeine and 100 milligrams of alpha GPC to energize your workouts, give you some serious focus and clarity. Best of all, each piece has like 10 calories and just 0 sugar, right? And is a refreshing mint flavor. So check it out at strikegum.com, where you can get an individual pack, or if you're like someone really looking for an energy drink alternative, so you don't want to spend $14 or $4 a pop on energy drinks, you can get the tray and end up 75 pieces. It ends up costing you like 68 cents a piece or something. Very, 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 very affordable. Best of all, 50% of the proceeds from this first production run of Strike Gum are going to go towards Ukrainian charities that benefit civilians who've been displaced in the conflict. So if you want to help Ukraine get a better energy drink alternative, go to strikegum.com. All right, let's see this young wannabe soldier.
Este, de los dos muchachos, pero anterior, las amistades mías me habían dicho, mira, tú vas por una vez, y yo le dijo, eso, yo lo sé. Le mandé el carnet. No ves, después del contrato, mira lo que dice, si estás de acuerdo con todo.
Also, yeah, he's got these face tattoos, he's got these huge pinky, which is weird, and a wedding ring. Okay. If we are in agreement with everything, just send me your passport. She says, there's a passport.
Envié foto del pasaporte. Le envié la foto del pasaporte. Porque aquí se pasa trabajo, aquí se pasa 25,000 cosas.
Interesting. It's a quick aside about the state of Cuba, because here you have to work hard to get things done. You have to redo them 25,000 times. I think he's describing navigating the Cuban bureaucracy. And this is pretty common, guys. If you live anywhere, when the government wants something done, right, it's almost perfunctory to do whatever bureaucratic hurdles, right? Like collecting taxes, right? The government collects its taxes automatically. You have to put in work to not pay your taxes, right? The part that's really, really difficult that you have to redo and is really complicated and involves a bunch of forms is getting your refund. This isn't like a promotion. I'm just telling you how governments work. And this is sort of how a lot of these systems operate. Look at the U.S. had a program for student loan forgiveness. And the idea was that if you serve 20 years or 10 years in a nonprofit entity or a community like in a hospital or doing social work, that the government would forgive your student loans, your federal student loans. Well, the program went for about 2008 to 2018, or it started in 2008. So the first payments were actually due in 2018. And they found that 96% of applicants had something wrong in their paperwork, meaning that the government didn't have to pay them, which worked out for the government because it never actually funded the program, right? So there was no money for the programs, and miraculously, they found issues with literally 24 out of every 25 applicants. So he's not alone in this. I imagine in a highly centralized communist state like Cuba, and that's not a pejorative. Cuba itself would call itself a communist state. That when they don't want to distribute any resources, this is how they manage it. If they can't charge money, right? If they can't control distribution of resources by assigning a price in currency, right? Like you can do in a free market. Instead, you have to assign a price and manage the distribution of resources using these sort of bureaucratic hurdles. And I can guarantee you, if you know the right person within the Cuban bureaucracy, you don't have to redo them 25,000 times. You do it once, and then your friend makes it happen. This is how these bureaucracies work. You still do work. You could, if you still control certain levers, you can get things done. But it's about who you know, or it's about how much raw effort you're willing to put in, right? So things still have a price.
Cosas. Y por eso todo el mundo dijo, escojo esto y no me muero de hambre en Cuba.
Yeah. I don't want to die of hunger in Cuba. That's fair.
Pero ellos sabían para dónde van. Ellos sabían perfectamente. Yo sabía perfectamente para dónde vivía también.
Right. La Federal here is the region, the town that we talked about in the article, where you've got, again, all of these men who are being recruited, targeted for recruitment by Russia. You can see there is his son hanging out, having a drink, in his Russian military jacket. Again, imagine being a Cuban and just going right from a country that's highly centralized, where there's a real chance you're going to starve to death, to just seeing a supermarket like this and being like, shit, I can afford like food on a regular basis. Like, it's kind of wild. And you see this sometimes. When I was in the military, the U.S. military, we had a lot of soldiers from Puerto Rico. We had a lot who were actually like green card holders who were born in Mexico or Guatemala or El Salvador. And those guys, like the difference, you know, a lot of soldiers who grew up in the United States, they'd sit there and they'd complain, or they're like continental US, they'd complain. They'd be like, oh, the food here sucks. Meanwhile, the guys who grew up in like rural Puerto Rico with no running water were just like, you mean I can go back for seconds? We'd be like, yeah, shit, dude. Yeah. They're like, fuck yeah, dude. This is great. This is wild. Right? They were on like vacation at airborne school, 3 meals, you know, basic training was like a pleasure. I'm like, wait, so I get paid. I just do what the drill sergeants tell me. I march around. They tell me how to do everything beforehand, and they feed me, and they don't charge me for it. They're like, this is great. This is wonderful.
Cuando nosotros nos enteramos de todas las cosas.
No, yo me enteré el mismo día que se fue. Del proceso no sé, cómo fue el proceso, cómo lo hizo. El día que se fue, porque él nunca me dijo nada, ¿entiendes? Ya, y me enteré cuando le andaba creo que por el aeropuerto, llamó y me dijo.
No.
It's also worth noting, again, you can see, right, like people talk a lot about the rural poverty in Russia, and there's a lot for sure, but it's like they say, there's levels to the game, you know? And if you're from like a Western European country or the United States, Canada, you'd go to Russia and you'd be like, damn, this is like a pretty low tier European country. But if you were a Cuban from like rural Cuba, or you could probably run the same scheme in places like Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Nepal, any place that has like a deeper level of poverty, you know, you're talking about a 10x difference. Like truly, like they said, a 2,000 rubles, a $2,000 a month salary is peanuts. It's like conscript wages to the U.S. It's a middle class salary in Russia, but to a Cuban, like we said, it's 100 times what everyone else is making. So again, like, what would you do for that $300,000 check? Right? You'd drop it, you'd put some in the bank, you'd get yourself a new car, you would buy yourself, be like, hey, I have food for a year. And when your family's in danger of starving and you know that you can earn a decade's worth of food in a month, yo, the math looks different, man. Especially if you're someone who you're a man, right? You're a guy, you want to provide for your family. You can't, there's no jobs, there's no work. You're not going to go become a computer programmer. This sort of appeal is significant. Again, it's interesting to me because one said most of the 5 men signed up for non-fighting roles in construction or logistics. But again, those interviews make it sound like that's a farce, that they go, I know what I'm signing up to do. I'm sure because I'm sure Russia has plenty of conscripts and Russians who will do these roles, you know, they just need fighters. Right? One person, the video called said 119 Cubans were training outside of Moscow. Signed a contract to work for the military, translated into Spanish. Right? So 119, this sounds like it was like a pilot program. There's a woman and there's her husband in boot camp in Russia. Interesting. The other appeal is that Putin actually allowed foreigners who signed on with the military on a 12-month contract could get Russian citizenship on a fast track, along with their spouses, children, and parents. Yeah, so all you got to do is stay alive for 12 months, and then you and your family can become Russian citizens. All right, getting out of rural Cuba and into Europe is a huge deal. Again, a game changer, really. Fascinating to see people say, "Oh, almost all our friends have gone over there," and it sounds like, again, a pretty classic move. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Be sure to hit subscribe. Thanks to everybody that has been supporting me on Combat Vet News, helping me deal with this hack. Check us out, strikegum.com. I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.